Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Decode Strategy live streams. And thank you so much for being a part of it. Last weekend, we had a little bit of a technical glitch because of which we could not go live. There was some issue with the audio stream, so I am extremely sorry about that. But we will be back with Dhiren the following weekend. So make sure you stay updated with the announcements, and we will be back with him next weekend. So for today, we've got a very special speaker with us. We've got Daisy. Daisy is the executive director of Nielsen IQ Basis, and she'll be talking to us about how research can increase the chances of new product success. But before we get into the details of today's topic, a little bit about this live stream. So this live stream is turning out to become Asia's hottest online classroom for marketers from marketing professionals. And there have been a ton of excellent heavyweight speakers, and Daisy included, who have blessed this live stream. And if you want, you can check out all the previous episodes and you'll know the quality of knowledge which is being shared on this platform. So I want to talk a little bit about myself. I started this company called Decode Strategy Labs early last year. And Decode Strategy Labs has two sides to the business. On one side, I have a consulting and advisory service where I work directly with clients on marketing-related projects. And on the other side, I also have an education and a training side of business where I do corporate training on marketing directly with companies, as well as I have an online course on strategic marketing, which is available on my website. So if you're someone who wants to learn more about marketing and is looking for a complete course, then this is probably something you should check out. As I mentioned before, there are two big events coming up. We've got Dhiren, who's the CMO of Kraft Heinz Asia, and he'll be joining us from Shanghai next weekend. And we had a little bit of glitch, but that event is coming back. So I haven't updated the event posters, so don't mind the dates on this. And after that, we've got Andrea, who'll be joining us from Barcelona. She is the global brand director of Reckitt, and she'll be talking about this amazing work that they've done in South America on the topic positive social impact and business growth through brand purpose. So couple of things, like, there's a lot of effort that goes on my part, as well as on the part of the speakers who grace this event. So there are a couple of things that you can do to help us, as well as stay updated with the events. So one small thing you can do is you can visit the Decode Strategy Labs LinkedIn page, and you can like the page, and so that you are updated with future events. Similarly, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you click on the bell icon, and all the recordings of every live stream that has happened are all available on the YouTube channel. And there is a ton of other content which I have created and posted on the YouTube channel as well. So if you are interested in learning, that's probably one good place for you to go and check out. And if you like the event, and if you like what we are sharing, then please just copy the link from the YouTube video, share it with your friends, post it on LinkedIn, pass it around, spread the good word. And if there is a speaker, or if you would like to be a speaker, and if there is a topic that you have in mind, then do reach out to me. My contact details are hello@decodestrategy.com. I would love to hear more. It is primarily through word of mouth, through the people that I have known and the people who they know, that I have been able to pull off an event like that. So without much ado, let's welcome today's speaker, Daisy. So let me just add her to the screen first. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the live stream.
Hi. Thank you so much. Well, I think first of all, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And what I have to say, it's extremely honored today to be here, and thank you for Rahul and the Decode Strategy Lab for this wonderful platform. It's my first live stream on internet. I I have never done it before. Although the topics that I'm going to talk about today, I'm more used to talk about in client presentation or client seminars with a live audience.
Right.
Although it's just I think we all need to adapt to the new world. So
Yeah.
we'll have to see how it goes. So this is my first attempt to do a kind of internet
Awesome.
sessions. Yeah.
Awesome. I feel so fortunate that you're doing your first live stream with me.
Yeah. It's a really kind of a first experience for me, and then of course very looking forward to this.
Awesome. So there's always a first time, and I'm sure this will be a good first experience. And I'm personally looking forward to this session in a big, big way. And I'm sure all the viewers of this channel will be extremely thankful that you decided to do this live stream. And I know there's some really high quality content that you're about to share. So the structure of this live stream session is pretty straightforward. Before For the audience, if during the live stream, if you all have any comments or if you all have any questions, then whether you're watching it on YouTube or you're watching it on LinkedIn, just type in the comments section, and we will be able to view those questions over here, and we'll try and take those questions at the end of the event. And for Daisy, I'm pretty much done with the introduction to the show, but it would be wonderful if you could talk a little more about yourself, about your background, how you got into research and probably the current role and what you're doing. And from there, maybe we can move on to the topic for today.
Sure. Absolutely. Um, I am, in a kind of a nutshell, I'm a quantitative researcher. I've been
Right.
doing market research, but with a specialization in the quantitative field.
Right.
At this stage, I'll probably avoid spelling out exactly how many years I've been doing that. So, I'm already beyond the kind of stage that at this point, I probably do not want to spell out so that it come across as how old I am. But in a nutshell, I've been doing this for many years, and then
Yeah.
my areas. I would say just to kind of summarize my experiences. There are two areas that I've been focusing on. One is in the area of brand equity and advertising testing.
Right.
I spent a few years with companies like Mirror Brand, and now is part of the Counter, and also briefly with Ipsos Connect.
Mhm.
So the majority of the work that I did over there is on advertising testing, which I'm sure Rahul and a lot of audience are familiar with. Yeah. So that part of the area is more to for help understand, work together with brand managers or clients, and also
Yeah.
an ad agency to
Right.
understand how consumer react to a certain campaign, and also when you put a campaign online, and how does it actually perform in the market, and what is the impact it has in terms of the brand equity, etc. So that's the one area that I've spent many years on. The
Right.
second area, which is a topic that it's actually closer to my heart. I would say
Yeah.
I like both, but I would say the innovation side of things is something that I feel more passionate about.
Right.
Um, so this is actually essentially about utilizing consumer research to help our client, like basically brand managers, mostly in the FMCG space, to
Hmm.
understand how they can actually develop or increase the chance of the new product success.
Okay.
Now, mostly my experience is with Nielsen basis. I guess if you are, in the CPG sectors, you probably would know what Nielsen is. It's a
Yeah.
pretty big companies, but you might not actually know basis.
Yeah.
So basis is actually I think majority of the people know Nielsen as a company that provide data, like your distribution, market share, and velocities, and all these things are coming from Nielsen as a company.
Yeah.
Now, basis is one business unit that within is part of the Nielsen family, but it's actually a company that has been, I would say, probably for close to 40 years.
Right.
Um, that is very specialized on the area about helping brand managers or like brand owners to understand the potential of their new launches.
Right.
It has been a kind of, I would say it's a specialized uh, practice, this area
Right.
that is only focusing on innovation.
Right.
Um, I've been with this company for, I started with them in China, and then I recently moved, like 3 years ago, I moved to Thailand.
Right.
I'm actually right now based out of Thailand
Okay.
for about like 3 or 4 years. And then apart, the majority of my innovation research, I would say, is with basis. I also spent like a few years, as briefly, like 3 years with another company that is also in the new product area, which is Mintel.
Right.
Intel is probably less known, but it is more it's not a, it's more like a syndicated research companies
Right.
with a area focusing on collecting intelligence on new product trend.
Hmm.
So these are the experiences that I have in this area about innovation.
Right.
So on
Right.
basis is more about collecting data and understand how consumers respond to a certain launches. And then Intel, it is more about understanding what's trending around the world, what are the emerging things that are actually being successful or from a global perspective. So this is actually the two areas that I spent my career on when it comes to the area of new product success. So that's pretty
Awesome.
briefly about my kind of research experiences. I mean, personally, I'm actually from China. I'm originally from China. I've been in China for
Hmm.
many, many years. Till 3 years ago, I was like, let's just make a change because I've been there for too long. So I moved to Thailand.
Hmm.
Mostly my experiences with Asia, kind of a spectrum, and of course in China, and I also had a little bit exposure to North Asia
Hmm.
when I was there, and then now for the past couple of years, it's been focusing on Southeast Asian market. I have a little dabble in India and in as well, but briefly, Asia is market that I'm more familiar with.
Right.
Uh, so this is roughly about myself, and I would
Wonderful.
say I would say I'm kind of very new product
Hmm.
or innovation and research
Hmm.
is a very interesting topic. I would say for many reasons, and
Hmm.
it's also a very complex topic, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so what? Yes,
Awesome. So on that note, I'll hand over the stage to you. Let me just pop your presentation on the screen. So all yours now. Please tell us how research can increase the chances of new product success.
sure. Thank you so much. Now, let me
Awesome.
first of all begin by saying this is a very complex area. It is actually, on one hand, a very complex area, but on the other hand, it's also a very, I would say, under researched area. There isn't being really too much of a kind of a textbook or kind of prototype learnings in this space. So what I'm going to share today is some kind of a knowledge that we accumulate over the both like within the both companies that I work for, and it's not necessarily a kind of textbook kind of things, but more coming from the learnings that we have accumulated over the years. What are the things that, based on what we observe, in happen in the market, and based on what we do in the consumer research space every day. From there, there's a couple of knowledge points or some kind of learnings per se that I personally think that can be beneficial to the wider audience. Yeah, so I just want to lay out the ground and then set up some context from there first. How we're going to structure the topics today, before we jump into the the kind of researchy details, I probably going to spend the first 10-15 minutes try to take a one step back a little bit first, and then more to look at a bit of a broader what's happening in the CPG world today, because we are very familiar with the idea of agility these days in the CPG world, right? So when it comes to innovation, it is all about you need to get to the market. Speed to market is matters. You need to be agile, and then so on the context of that, there's a few like thinkings that kind of influencing how manufacturers approach innovation today versus how they actually did maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I would like to try to spend a little bit time first on that area and then try to establish, why we think that there's still a few things that you need to check. So this is just more to provide the context in terms of some of the topics that we're going to talk about later. Then obviously we're going to spend most of the time to understand the second bucket in terms of what exactly you want to check and what point you want to check. Um, Over there, I wouldn't really focus too much on the, I would say, on the typical like sample size or questionnaire kind of standpoint. Um, we probably want to take a slightly different approach and talk about things from a more like conceptual standpoint, and then also illustrate some of the concept live by some of the very successful launches that we have been seeing in the market. Now, of course, we're going to close the sessions at the end by still going back to a little bit of a research, but I hope that it's not so heavy. More on the principles that we want to keep in mind when we think about quantitative research specific. Now, last note I just want to touch on before we move forward. It is the research that we talk about today is on quantitative side. For some of you might be familiar with the consumer research, the fundamental two methodology, which is one is quantitative and the other is qualitative. Both are actually answering, there are different objectives. Qualitative is more for exploratory needs. Quantitative has it's more kind of a role to play when it comes to, it helps you make a decision. Yeah. So what all the concepts that we're talking about today, it is more on the area of quantitative with the objective in mind that the result of such research needs to help us to meet the most fundamental needs is that it will need to help us inform our decisions when it comes to new product in the CPG context. So let's probably just dive into the first part in terms of the why. Now, why we want to talk about the why? It has a little bit of history in terms of the role of consumer research in the NPD process. Now, this actually began with the company I'm currently working for, the Basis. Basis is, for some of you might know, it's kind of the synchrony of some kind of something called simulated test market. In like 1970s and 1980s, when the bigger manufacturers like P&G or Livas or Coke, etc., when they actually try to decide which new product they need to launch in the market, what they would like, the kind of practice they follow is that there's a very rigid stage gate process in between. So from the right beginning that, okay, what are the ideas that you want to talk about, and here's a product, and move into the stage that whether the executive at the company level should invest and launch certain things into the market. So there's a lot of rigorous things that happen before that make that decision. So simulated test market used to be a kind of a golden standard back then to help these companies make a decision when it comes to which are the new product that they are going to put investment behind. They're going to put TV advertising, like push for distribution and promote it before they actually make a decision that I'm going to launch this in the market. Now, as you say, this is more like kind of the way that I put it is more like a kind of old school. The reason that it's old school is that when we move to the 21st century with the digitalization, the digital media landscape is changing significantly. And then also recently the e-commerce channel coming into the market. The environment is really changing rapidly. What happens for the past couple of like 10, 15 to 20 years space is the fact that the kind of cost to launch, the hurdle to launch actually has gone down significantly because you can easily experiment something on e-commerce or something else. That's one thing. And then the other is that there are a lot of startup companies come into the picture, and then some of them actually introduce some innovations that has been successfully changing the entire landscape of the category as well. So with these kind of changes, some of the the old school way of doing the stage gate process and simulate test market and all these things, at the point that these companies realize that, look, we've spent so many, this is the old process might not actually give them the success that they're seeing, right? So with these two things coming to the mind, especially in the past 10 years, what we've seen is that there's a little bit of a new normal happening in the CPG world, with the lot of the manufacturers trying to lift the agility concept from the tech industry to apply that when they approach the new product development process in the CPG sector. So agility becomes the new normal. So what it means over there is that speed to market is important. You don't really have the perfect product. You can just, minimum viable product, put it on the shelf, and then with the expectation that I can always test and iterate it live in the market. The simpler way of thinking about this when it comes originally coming from a tech sector is basically, if I think about I want to launch an app, if I'm developing some applications, I don't have to make it perfect, as long as it has some basic features and minimal viable product, MVP. I can publish it on live on the Apple stores, and then when people start to download it, based on their feedback, I always have the chance to test and iterate live in the market. So a lot of the manufacturers in the CPG sectors also start to live that particular practice in the CPG space. And this has also, over the past 10 years, what we see is this way of approaching new product has become the new normal. Yeah, if I were to, for the lack of a better word, it's a new normal. Yeah. Now, what is interesting is actually what, based on some of the observations, right, is that test and iterate live in the CPG context, there are actually a lot of nuances versus when you apply that kind of concept in the tech industry. What it typically happens is that although we hope that we have the chance to improve live when we put the product on shelf based on consumer feedback, what typically happens is that the reality is that in the CPG sector, unlike you put something on the Apple stores on application step, you don't really have enough time to actually iterate as you thought you would be, because there's a very short life windows that you will actually need to prove to your retailers that the product works, right? And then if you launch in the e-commerce channels, although you might have the chance to forever list the product over there, the consumers might not actually come and pick it up if it's not strong enough. So the reality is such that, like, for example, there's some data that we have analyzed at the Nielsen side, like where we actually track the innovations based on the distribution. So typically a 6 months window. Usually in the modern trade, it's 3 to 6 months window by itself is very clear enough to actually differentiate something that is actually a grower or something that just doesn't have potential to fly. So retailers usually will act within the 3 or 6 months period that decide that they will actually keep listing your product on the shelf over there. There's a very short window of time that you can actually act. And usually what happens is that if you have some fundamental issues you need to address in the product formulation, for example, or communication or packaging, 3 to 6 months, you probably don't even have enough time to have a second chance to begin with. Now, even if we think about in the e-commerce world, we are also very clear that people buy based on this star ratings. And if you first launch it on e-commerce, and then if your first review is really bad, then and automatically then it's kind of it's very difficult for you to get a second chance over there as well. So in other words, that in the CPG space, right, you will only strong product will have the chance of go viral. So what this means is, this is also not to mention the fact that we're actually producing a physical product. So unlike an application over there, when it kind of producing a physical product, there's also a lot of investment going behind by simply the material and producing it to begin with, not to mention the time and then the manpower that you spend in terms of research and development, in some the logistics, everything behind the scene to even get this one live to the market. So there are significant investment that we still put behind. And on the other hand, when you put this product on live, there's a very short window of time that you can actually act to correct it. So what this means is that even in the new world, we're talking about agility, we're talking about speed to the market, there are still things that you need to get it right before you hit the launch button, right? So this is actually why this kind of the why contest that I would like to kind of establish first before we get into the specific in terms of what are the things that that we would really want to get it right. So having said that, um, if you think about agility or experimentation in the CPG context, it's really not about I just launched 10 product, give or take, I put 10 product on the shelf, let it fly, and then whatever comes out as good sales, maybe by chance, by luck or whatever, then I will keep that product over there, and then hopefully that this one will scale. It is more about the fact that I still need to spend the proper time to think about what other things that I want to put on the shelf. If after I put this one in the shelf, the kind of experimentation is not really looking for some significant change on the product design. The experimentation is more like within the short window, I need to actually demonstrate a good sales number that is enough. Either if you're a startup, it's enough to actually attract a second round of investors to help you scale, or even if you're operating in big companies, that you still need to have some sales number to prove to your CEOs to give you money to looking at the scale. So it's more about validate the core idea before you put in on launch. You can still refine certain things within like 3 or 6 months of time, the first windows. But more importantly, after you launch, what you need to look for is more in terms of experiment and explore the opportunity to scale it further. Not necessarily come back and doing everything from scratch again. So this is essentially where we think about the idea about agility. There's some kind of common misconceptions that we might actually see, and then what so from the conversations we've been having at Basis or some of the companies with our clients, more and more or less, we're probably more coming to realization that when we're looking at agility in the CPG context, this is the kind of thinking. There's some certain disciplines that we still need to follow. So having said that, right, there's still a core areas that we want to make sure that we get it right before you click the launch button. Now, we're going to elaborate on these core areas later on in the slide, but just to give a bit of a preview in terms of what are the specific aspect or dimensions that we need to validate. As a starting point, obviously it has to be something really relevant, right? Does it really have a real problem that I'm trying to solve for the consumers? So the relevance is the most fundamental starting point. And then moving on to the next button is really about what are the current options that consumers are having by resolving that problems. And the question that we really need to spend more time to ask ourselves is that do we really have something that can offer something substantially better than what consumers are currently having? Yeah, so that's also that's again the competitive advantage is something that is also very important for us to tackle. And then the competitive advantage or something that's substantially better is not just also at the claim level, your product formulation, and then your product will really need to deliver on that promises as well. So that's are the most. These are the two I would say the most fundamental things that we need to address. And then relating to that context is obviously that there's a little bit of a value proposition comes into place as well. The value here is just more coming from a consumer and the competition's landscape. It is not necessary. It's also another angle in terms of internal margin, this profitability side, which is not part of this, but it's also something you need to consider. But if we only think about this from a consumer acceptance standpoint, what is the price range that I should actually offer that can actually justify the kind of advantage that I claim or I can deliver versus the alternatives that they're currently using. So that's also another very important angle to decide the size of the price that I'm actually going to, and also how sustainable this launch is going to be. The last bit, which might not be the case every single thing that you think about it, but in certain cases, especially when we talk about these things in terms of the breakthrough ideas or disruptive ideas, we typically are actually dealing with something probably new, a little bit of newness to consumers, something that there are certain areas about that particular thing that they are not very familiar with. Now, if you are actually getting into that kind of situations, then we do need to think a little bit critically as well to make sure that we address certain adoption barriers as well. So these are the, broadly speaking, are the broader bucket that you want to make sure that you take before you make a decision, before you actually put some kind of what they call it MVPs or something else, before you actually put that into the shelf. Now, when you actually start to moving to the closer to launch stage, um, a lot oftentimes you will actually start to experiment in a small scale. You don't necessarily have like a national distribution right away, or you can launch across channels. Very common practice today is that either you experiment, launch something on e-commerce or in some other market. You might experiment in modern trade or convenience store, depending on the nuances of market and category that you play in. You usually will start with a smaller scale, and when you start there, there's also a tactical side of things that we need to also align, which is like the pack size, pricing, um, element that needs to be aligned very well with the channels that you experiment in. The channels also decide on two things, like what are the shopper profile over there and what are the competitions offerings in that particular channel that you need to keep in mind. So this again is a bit more on the technical side, but also very important that you need to make sure these things talking to each other as well. Now at the last point is really about opportunity to scale. So these are the things that that we need to actually think about when we think about agility concept in the CPG space. So let's maybe look at this concept one by one, and beginning with something probably very easy to kind of explain the idea about being relevant. Now, this is probably very commonly you have like tens or other 20 different way of talking about it. Is you have to have a right consumer problem to solve, or you meet consumer needs, or sometimes like okay, it's not necessarily they need, but it's a product they really aspire to have. So relevance is basically all these things. One thing that I would like to probably spend a bit more time is that in occasions where you are actually trying to looking for something that is pushing the category boundary, or in other words, that is something that actually kind of I would say a bit more futuristic thinking in mind, then you want to actually explore relevance, not necessarily coming from the benefits space or usage occasion or benefit space or typical kind of UNA kind of mentality in the existing space, but you probably want to look at things more coming from a broader consumer behavior lens. You think about what are the relevant usage behaviors that consumers might have that kind of decide on defining this particular consumption moment. Now, what exactly this is kind of very conceptual, but I think it's probably easier if I illustrate this by this particular example. So this is actually a fabric softener um, new launch in Japan. Okay, it is actually coming from Kao, which is a obviously very well-known leading players in the household and personal care space in Japan. Now, when we talk about fabric softener or fabric conditioner in some market, what are the typical benefits come to your mind, right? It makes my clothes soft. There's no, it makes my soft and smooth or freshness, the smell good. these are the typical benefits that you associate with when you think about fabric softener. So if you want to innovate something like from a typical benefit standpoint, that you probably think about, okay, how I can just get the softness, extra softness, or I can just get the freshness even longer. So these are the typical things that happen in this particular space. Now, when we actually think about something that is actually kind of a pushing the category boundary, is this particular launch, that what they actually do over there is that instead of saying freshness or softness, a typical space, this particular product is actually to offer you a experience to help you stay dry throughout the day. So what do you mean by dry? So think about in summertime, after you use this particular product, discuss certain technology they borrow from the deodorant category. So this is actually based on the claim that you see here. It's Japanese characters. I'm trying to explain a little bit here. So what Kao is trying to do over there is that there are certain new technology that they come up with, that after applying the product on the clothes, then there's a certain element that is there that can actually help you stay dry for the time that you wear it. So this is a very, very new space. That is a benefit space that is never exist in this fabric softener space before. However, it is very relevant coming from the way that the consumer interact with the particular usage moment, right? If I think about at the end of the day, what fabric softener do, it's actually help you something to enhance my in-wear pleasure. So when I wear a cloth, if it's soft, I feel great in the particular fabric. Now, if I think about that lens, so in terms of in-wear pleasure standpoint, then obviously the dryness comes into picture, especially in summer times, where you always have the sweating issues and stuff like that. Then the dryness linked to the in-wear pleasure moment becomes a very relevant experience if you think about the things coming from the consumer usage experience standpoint. Now, this is actually a kind of I would say, a typical breakthrough options that really pushing the category boundary forward. Now, if you want to, you really need to looking for such things that benefits a benefit kind of an area that simply does not really existing today. You want to push something forward, then you have to take a bit more step back. Think about the relevant usage experience and the context first. So this by itself might open up more opportunities, like versus what you would typically think about a softness or freshness that is actually over there in the fabric softer space. Now, I hope that is kind of elaborate the kind of concept that we're trying to address. The last bit I'm just going to quickly touch upon. I'm not going to elaborate too much. These days, also because of the information, we are living in a stage where the digital age, right? So you easily come to know what is trending and what is a popular product in US or in Japan, in other markets. And then oftentimes that manufacturers these days tend to also look out for these trends as inspiration for them to come up with something in terms of local market. Now, I just want to have a bit more caveat here is that whenever we talk about these global trends, we really want to think about a bit harder in terms of the social context, social cultural context, or like the competitive landscape behind such trends, that to help you make a decision that whether this is actually something really relevant, is something that you can really lift to your particular market that you're operating in. Like for example, we know for a fact that the coconut water has been a very popular thing in US like for many years, right? And hardly in Asia you have seen coconut water being a big hit any market. So this is actually what I'm trying to say, because essentially the reason that the coconut water becomes something very popular in the US has some kind of fundamental social cultural context over there that probably does not really exist in this part of the world. Like for example, the reason that it was becoming initially popular is because it was initially designed as an alternative, a cleaner option for sports hydration. Um, the sports drink as a category over there, like the Gatorade product, the traditional Gatorade product, for example, that's actually used more kind of known as a artificial or high sugar content. So in the context of that, there is a drive in general for people looking for cleaner options. And then, of course, coconut is kind of naturally high in electronic kind of proposition, naturally come into the picture, that being usually seen as a natural alternative for such occasions. So there is a broader competitive landscape. There's very established occasions. There is a solution that people are eager to replace, and of course, coupled with other things like social media, the way they promote it over there, etc., to make it a kind of a popularity, a kind of successful launch over there. But if you think about coconut water in Asian market, do we really have that kind of strong sports drink as by itself is not a very big category to begin with. And this, not to mention the fact that there's not so much of so to begin with, by that you're actually looking at a very niche area to begin with, and not to mention the fact that coconut water in Thailand, in Philippines, so these are actually the product that originated from this market. Instead of people paying a premium for a packaged like nicely packaged coconut water, there's easily options like fresh coconut you can buy on the street anytime. So there are all these nuances that are coming to the place to also help you. You need to actually think about these things a bit harder before you want to react or take some actions against some global trends. It's not necessarily that something that's popular in the US can be easily just change the packaging and put it on the shelf, and then it will automatically fly in this part of the world as well. So relevance is also a certain context. It's in the local. There's a very strong local context here as well. So this is the first part. The second part, so suppose that we take the first bucket, right? Suppose that I do have something that I think, I really meet the needs of consumers. Now the next questions that really we need to spend time and make it right is, do we really have something to offer to consumers that are actually substantially better versus the current options they already have? So this is actually critically important. And then it's a bit more complex. There really are different dimensions into it as well. So the first one is, there's always a advantage that they're actually at a claim level versus something that's really substantially better. Okay. And then the second one is also like, what are the alternatives they're trying to compete with? The last bit is also about, it's not just about the claim, it's always about the product performance. So there are three very important angles that we need to get it right when we really decide on the fact that whether my launch can really offer a competitive advantage over there as well. So again, let's look at this by some examples. Substantially better. What do we mean by substantially better versus marginally better? So again, if you look at one example, that Chobani as a yogurt brand is probably, I would say, one of the most talk about successful innovations in the industry these days. If you are familiar with CPG, or if you're familiar with food and drink, more or less you're probably going to come across this brand one way or another. This is such a yogurt brand launched in the US in 2007. In the over a course of 5 years, it's coming from a zero. It's starting from a zero. It's a completely new brand, startup companies. In the course of 5 years, it's overtake the entire yogurt category share in the US, 1/4. The market share they're able to achieve in 5 years is actually 25%. Now, what Chobani is offering something here, why do we think it's something that's substantially better? So it's really take the offerings to the next level. So based on three things. Yeah? Number one is that it's a clean formula that is predominantly based on a technology advancement, that you can actually have a thick texture of a Greek yogurt that's not necessarily coming from a added additives to make it thick, but the texture by itself is really a technology. They have really a kind of come up with a technology that can translate the original naturally strained Greek yogurt way of making a thick texture into a kind of mass production capabilities. So that's obviously a fundamental shift that they're able to bring to the market. Now, the second area that this one is also very deliver also a very good advantage. It's also a win on nutrition value. Chobani was launched at the time where there's a big shift it's a big consumer drive in US for a cleaner, healthy diet. So in the context of that, people are constantly more aware of the sugar content. They are becoming more aware that the sugar is not good to your body. And in the meantime, there's a very strong shift towards high protein, low sugar. So that's also another advantage that this, from a nutritional value standpoint, this brand is able to bring to the table. And of course, at the end of the day, it's a food, right? It's a yogurt. So flavor taste by itself also needs to be something very important. Now, the fact that Greek yogurt by itself is a thick in texture, and when it kind of blended with some fruit purees or something else, it does have some kind of advantage versus a versus a normal yogurt, that you have a bit more creaminess texture in play. From a sensorial standpoint, it's also something relatively easy to for a flavor for fulfillment standpoint as well. So this is actually something that we think is substantially better. Um, a, Marginally better. I have something. I don't mean to be like, for example, if we say marginally better is something like, okay, like if you have a, let's say, the fabric softener, that you already have something that offer you freshness for a day, then you launch something that can help you help the fragrance last for 24 hours, or like 2 weeks, or even longer period of time. That is probably something that's not really changing the landscape altogether, right? It's not something that fundamentally offers something that just doesn't exist. When it comes to a substantially better, it is something that does not previously exist. Why we think so? I think maybe just this is actually an example to illustrate this a bit more in terms of the natural strain technology. It is reflected in the ingredient label. You can see here is that a typical chobani, if it's plain yogurt, the ingredient label is very simple. It is milk, and then it is culture, and that's it. There's nothing else. You don't have something typical that on the ingredient list like cornstarch or gelatin. These are the things that usually used as thickeners in the food to make the texture thicker. So this is actually a startling differences that you can immediately see on the label by itself. And then also from a nutritional content standpoint, it's obvious. It's again something very usual, very like obvious to consumers. This is a serving that this is like 5.3 ounces in the US terms. So translated into a grammage kind of terms, the protein content is probably looking at around plus minus 10% ish. And if you're familiar with dairy, then a natural dairy, or if it's a fermented yogurt without any straining processes, that the natural protein content is roughly around 3 to 4 grammage per 100 gram. Now, this is automatically something that you're looking at has like 2.5 times more protein versus a natural. So in a simple term, this is more like a concentrated version of your nutrition versus a natural versus something that you typically get from a plain milk or plain yogurt. And of course, if it's a plain flavor, then it doesn't really have any added sugar in there. You still have some total sugar because lactose as a that's more because of the lactose, the sugar content naturally over there in the milk, but not necessarily any additional added flavors over there. Now, of course, that it's a food, so whenever we talk about food and whenever we talk about dietary trend and healthy, people always want healthy, but eventually if you can't deliver the taste experiences, people are going to go away anyway, because nobody wants to really punish themselves by eating something that does not taste good, even though I know that it's going to do me all this good. So because of the thick texture by itself, whenever it's kind of blended with all these whether it's natural fruit or it's blended with some other like flavors, it does offer you a very slightly different, or like kind of elevated texture experience over there as well. So all these three things coming together, it is able to bring something that just doesn't really exist in the market before. So this is actually something that we think as example that can probably illustrate the concept about being something really substantially better. Now, just a little bit of data here that we know that it was originally launched in 2007. It was a very, very small scale launch. It was only in a few specialty retail stores, probably in the New York areas. Yeah. But then, of course, this is a strong product by itself, right? It automatically went viral after that. In 5 years after its originally launched, it is able to achieve 1/4 of the total yogurt category already in the US. Just 5 years. And then after that, of course, then they're actually taking the riding on the success of the base formula. They expand into they add a little tweak in the product format, then successfully expand into additional usage occasions. And then they launched this flip, which is targeting snacking and then drinking yogurt format. And then, of course, recently, because of the non-dairy trend, they also expand into some other space. This is actually probably one of the most, I would say, talk about successful innovations in the industry. And then the simple reasons for them to be so successful is simply because it is able to bring something that is really substantially different from the what it was being available in the market before. In other words, it has kind of elevated the entire offerings that actually exist over there in the category. So this is the first aspect of being advantaged. Now, the second part I want to touch upon is also that in the Chobani case, who you are competing with is very clear. I am simply bringing a better option, a better yogurt into the market, right? So I'm competing with other yogurt offerings that are in the market. But in a lot of other cases, especially in food and drink, or especially in the border contest today, a lot oftentimes that I'm not really competing only within the options that my immediate category. So this is example from Japan. It's RTD, it's ready to coffee by design, but it's not actually designed in a mind that the advantage that this one is trying to offer is not necessarily to compete with the traditional RTD coffee per se. Rather, I'm actually competing with the over-the-counter options over there. Let's probably look at this one a bit more further so that it's kind of clear in terms of what we're trying to talk about here. RTD coffee is in Japan is very long established category with a lot of histories. Yeah, so if you have a chance to visit Japan, in the convenience store, you usually see a very, I would say, kind of 1/4 of the chilled sectors is full of all these different RTD coffee that is typically in a can, small can format, and then some of it is also in this bottle can. Yeah, so like the right-hand examples, but both of them are, I would say, from a taste profile standpoint, is your typical RTD coffee. I would say it's difficult for me to explain it, but my personal take is basically that it usually have those kind of sourness-ish kind of a taste that you typically have in the 3-in-1 or in the RTD coffee per se. Now, the history of this particular category is that it is actually something that usually targeted. It's kind of something that just exists in the market for a very long time. As of today, is usually have a baggage of being usually old, kind of associated with a bit of older generation, or sometimes with a bit of a blue collar worker kind of space is less premium or less refined taste over there. So this is actually where the category it is today. Now, as we all know that the younger generation, as it happens in any other market, usually don't drink this kind of product anymore. So what usually the younger generation drink is obviously the over-the-counter options, ranging from the premium, like coming from the Starbucks is the most um, kind of associated number, the premium options. And then in the very mature coffee market, like the hand dripped or the third wave cafes, like Blue Bottles or a lot of small and niche craft options, are the ones that are actually really taking the refined taste to extreme over there. So this is actually one type of things that the younger generation usually go to. Now, if you look at the budget-friendly options as well, in Japan in particular, the convenience stores also is a very big players in the coffee space. What these options are typically offer is that it has a better taste versus RTDs, not as good as obviously as like blue bottles or all these kind of hand drip and boutique cafes per se, but in terms of a price that you need to pay versus the taste you get, it is actually a quite unique budget friendly options that you can easily get over the counter as well. So these are the options that typically a younger generation would look for. So when Suntory think about this, launch this particular craft, they call it the craft boss kind of RTD bottle coffee. What they really have in mind, that the target that they're trying to get in mind is really the younger generation who look for a refined taste. So in that way, from a taste sensation standpoint, the advantage that I'm trying to think about is really not about this type of RTD coffee that, that I RTD coffee in the traditional category space. Is more about I need to really look on the right hand side. I need to make sure that this particular coffee from a taste profile standpoint is really something can be able to compete with the over the counter options that are freshly brewed over there. So that is actually one landscape of thinking about competitive. The second option, the second thing when it comes to the competition, it is still a RTD coffee by design, right? So what do we mean by that is it is still something when people go into a store and pick up from the shelf, it is still something that is going to be shelved together with this kind of a RTD can, a bottle can over there. So when they think about the price range standpoint, the range, if you see over here, it's a big bottle, 500 ml. The price range is not actually parity versus the over counter. It is significantly cheaper if I were to compare this with the over the counter options. If we think about this from a serving perspective, a typical middle size over the counter, like 220 ml, is usually like 150 Japanese yuan, right? Now, this particular product is priced at 160 or 170, but I'm actually getting twice of the size of versus what I'm getting over here on the over the counter. So this by itself is a budget friendly option to begin with. But then if I think about the comparison versus the left hand side, a typical can bottle is actually offered as one serving, like 120 ml, is usually priced at 100 and 130. So if I bought, so so what this one, the price range is kind of catering to is basically I'm offering something a bigger size at a cheaper price versus a RTD coffee space. Now this is actually a very important thing from two perspectives. Number one is that from a when consumer go to a shelving, like when they actually look for a product, right? The direct comparison they're gonna have is actually this kind of a product over there. So this is a baseline that I'm actually looking at. So I can't be price significantly. I can't take the price range too high so that it kind of really go beyond the range that typically people expect to pay. That's number one. Number two is also that the target that they're trying to design, the younger generation in Japan is, I'm not sure, this is actually a bit more like cultural context over there. The younger generation that they're trying to target over there is also a generation that is born and that is actually grow up in the post-economic, like they actually grow after the recession period in Japan, where typically the younger generation is associated or more like as a poorer generation. They do not really have the wealth that they don't really live through the 1980s where the Japan economy is so booming, right? So they're actually coming after that, which with a bit more economic pressure to persist. So these consumers, does the budget friendly is also something actually very important to attract them as well. So with all these different elements coming to the play, the competition that I'm trying to compete with has a lot of deciding factors when it comes to the advantages I'm trying to bring. Number one, you have to look at the taste and profile and product standpoint, and also the price range that I'm going to compete in, which ultimately are going to translate into a good value proposition that can actually help the target consumers to be able to adopt this product over the period of time. So this again it has a lot of things into the play over there. But if we think about this one from both product design standpoint, from price range standpoint, it really have to everything really need to have to sync very well in terms of the competitive landscape that we're trying to compete in. Now, of course, at the end of the day, that your product really to deliver on the promise. Now, this is a live session. Of course, we won't be able to have the chance to taste the product. I personally tried this product when before the COVID days when you can still travel. It is actually something that is not that you don't really have the sourness taste that you typically have from RTD coffee. I won't be able to explain this further by word, but if you have the chance to try it out, I would really encourage you to. You can only try it on the live and then try to understand, relate to the promises they're trying to make over there to consumers. So this is actually coming from the Suntory website when they actually introduced this design behind this product by itself. The promises they're trying to deliver is basically the freshness taste of the coffee can actually last a longer throughout a gradual consumption period of time. Of course, from the explanation standpoint, they have taken like 200 processes and stuff like that. I won't be able to know exactly what's behind these R&D technologies, but just by taking a sip of the product, you probably would realize it is actually something can actually have the potential to deliver the promises they made to consumers. Now, this is actually the aspect of competitive advantage that you really need to claim and need to deliver, and sometimes also that you need to think a bit more beyond the immediate space that you're playing in as well. Now, let's talk about the last bit about the core product design. Now, oftentimes that we are thinking about innovation today, there's a lot of things like disruptive behaviors comes into picture, right? Instead of saying disruptive behaviors, so what essentially happening over there is that there might be something that is actually introduced, you are trying to do that is actually new. There's always a certain aspect in the launch that you're trying to do over there. There might be something that people are not familiar with before. Now you have to be a bit careful over there and then try to think about what are those areas that are new, and then how can I overcome those newness? Because at the end of the day, we would want to people to kind of adopt this particular new solutions in over a period of time. It's not something that you expect them to try out of novelty. There's something really new on over there that I'll just buy it and I drink it. I tried it once and then after that I forget about it. the only opportunities for them to come back again, it has to be something that it offer man new experience, but also catered into a very established consumption behavior as well. So the newness and the familiarity both will have to be really in sync very well. So this is a bit more tricky to define. There's a lot of nuances, or there are a lot of occasions that actually that can actually fit into this area. But some of the examples that we typically can come across, the most basic level taste profile. Now we all know that people have aspirations to say, "I want to be healthy," right? And then, but the reality is also that if in the market where all the RTD beverages, like majority of the RTD beverages are actually high in sugar content. So what this means is that consumers are already very used to a sweetness level that is already offered over there by the existing options. Now, if you keep that things in mind, and if I need to really want to launch a healthier versions, it will be really difficult for people to switch to something like complete without sugar or without any sweetness right away. So that is actually not something that's going to happen. So to cater to that particular needs, you have to think about a kind of a process to gradually shift the people from high sweetness to low sweetness, and eventually it might come to a zero sweetness, but it really probably going to happen over a longer period of time. It's definitely not happening right away. Now, in some other cases that some manufacturers might do is that you can actually keep the sweetness level, but you're adding sugar alternatives and stuff like that. But the taste profile people are already used to does come across sometimes will be a barrier when you think about something that you're already thinking in mind that you want to offer over there. The second thing is obviously an occasion. Like, say for example, if I in again there's one example that I can think about, like concentrate in the detergent space. When a concentrate formula, when the Japan is again the Kao launch in Japan, when they initially introduced a concentrated liquid detergent versus a dilute, um, to be able to actually help consumers to adopt that particular product, what they actually add, apart from the normal claim that you can actually think about, like the the concentrate comes with super cleaning, superior cleaning efficacy, etc., etc. They also add one more benefit, like one brings benefit towards it, and then in the initial days of the communication, they are trying to also leverage on this one particular one brings benefit, and then they clearly say that you can easily use it for a quick wash mode for your washing machine. So immediately that in consumers' mind, there is a very clear moment that can actually trigger them to adopt a particular new format. So these are also the tricks that you can think about to gradually introduce something that they're not really used to before, and over a period of time, they're becoming a bit more regular usage around the way. And the last thing, sometimes you could also think about a tackle this barrier by communication. So I do have an example that this is actually a pretty old launch from China, but it's actually illustrates this example pretty well. Now, essentially, by design, this is a RTD juice product. What do I mean by RTD? So it's kind of a light content juice content. It's have a very like 3%, 4% of juice in there. So by design, by the label registrations, it is essentially RTD juice. However, before this particular product was launched into the market, RTD juice is not typically associated with a hydration occasion, for the simple reason that it's usually very sweet. So the more you drink it, you feel sweeter after that, right? So when you really need something that kind of cooling myself down, or when I'm really thirsty in the summertime and we're looking for something to really kind of for refreshing experiences, RTD juice is not something typically common in consumers' mind. Now, when they actually trying to introduce this particular product, um, the intention is to get into the hydration space. Um, what they actually do over there, instead of saying it's RTD juice, They first of all has a little bit of tweak in the formula. They add a little bit of salt in the formula, because salt in China context, and I'm sure that in some other Asia culture context, salt is an ingredient that is typically associated with a drink that can help you replenish your third and then prevent you from heat stroke in the very hot summertime. So that ingredient by itself is a pretty self-explanatory kind of a notion to communicate to the consumer that what this product can really provide for you. So instead of saying this is RTD juice, or it can give you refreshing feelings, they went straight ahead into when communicate the product. They went straight ahead into in terms of communicating what the product does for you. The name of the product is basically literally translated into English in terms of salt from the sea, and then the proposition by the look of it, advertising by itself is pretty clear that it combination of the salt from the sea with the juice content, that it will give you a refreshing feeling in the summertime. So instead of trying very hard to explain this is like not heavy sweeter juice as you would have anticipated, blah blah blah, um, they bypass the category per se, go directly towards what it does for you. So in that way, it successfully establish something immediately new is to consumers' mind in terms of what it is. The other thing that they also did very smartly is that in these days, the other way of thinking about this, like when the light flavor things, trying to get into hydration space, you might actually typically think about it as a flavor. Oh, this is a flavor water, yeah. So, but the reality is that in a lot of Asia market, right, when the bottled water is usually priced half of the usually the price is half or maybe sometimes even one third of the price of a typical RTD beverages. There's a big ladder that you need to claim over there, from a plain water to a flavor drink. So if they were to launch this as a flavor water notion, then there's always a jeopardy that they get into, that is very difficult for people to pay 2 times or 3 times of the money of something just with added a little bit of juice content over there. So again, this particular launch by itself, this probably not going to be a win if they communicate this from a typical category perspective, and so therefore they went straight into a proposition. This is actually something that a communication can actually do very smart job to try to introduce something new, yet in the meeting needs that people can easily understand what it does for me and when I should drink it. So another example in terms of how you should actually, so you can probably watch out and how you can think about some of the adoption barriers that we're talking about as well. Now the last bit, we're moving pretty close to the launch stage. Then if you think about like the channel that you're going to experiment, right? Aligning the pack size and price point is also very important versus the channel that you experiment in. Now, this is a startup company in Thailand. The brand is called Diamond Grain. It's a little bit small on the screen here. The brand is called Diamond Grain. If you can see here is the logo. It's a startup company that is experimenting in the granola and then breakfast cereal category. The intention is to offer something healthier over there. But as we all know that breakfast cereal by itself is not a popular category in this part of the world again. So when they started to experiment in the market, they initially start with the bigger size, something you typically expect in the super premium outlet, like a very premium outlet over there. Okay, if I explain this in this way, that in Thailand, for modern trade is probably around 60-70% of the market, and then you have this traditional trade. But within modern trade, convenience store is actually a bigger players in Thailand. So if I will take a ratio, probably 70% out of the modern trade is probably a convenience store versus super hypermarket, and then you have another niche things like a premium, bit more like premium organic food hypermarket chains over there. because of this is a premium and healthy options in between to begin with, they initially launched this big size in the premium food outlet, but of course it's a very small fraction of the market. Now of course they have to think about it, but they want to scale, right? They want to enter into a new channel, which is convenience store. It's a bigger channel opportunity for them to grab. But obviously you can't launch in convenience store with this bigger size, because the shopper profile over there is very different. People are more like on the go, and then it's usually a small size purchase occasions, and then price point is also much lower. So when they tailor this particular launch into the new channel they're trying to get into, they change the pack size offerings into something like a single serve, and it's more like on targeting the shopper profile over there, fitting a better needs in terms of the breakfast or on the go occasions. So this is also a bit more tactical, but again, something very realistic you have to think about, depending on your channels and then the shopper profile that you're actually looking for. You really have to tailor your size and price point accordingly as well. Now, this is another example again from Thailand. It's a really successful startup brand before COVID. It's called Play More. It I think in the simple terms, I would just explain this more like kind of a mint, but with a focus on fruity flavorish mint. The direct competition you can think about is more like kind of a horse, but the product experience is quite different. Where traditional mint is a bit more strong on mintish flavor. You give you a bit of stimulating kind of a sensation. Where this particular offerings, it is still a mint kind of things, but it's really focused on the fruity experiences, a bit more sweet on over there as well. Now they actually also have a little bit of very unique brand identity communicated through the brand name and the pack design, etc. So this again is a kind of experimental launch to begin with, but this one is actually experiment first with a size that comes with a smaller pack size, comes at a lower price point, a significantly lower price point versus a typical pack size versus horse. Just to illustrate a bit further, like in Thai baht terms, that this particular pack size is actually 12 gram and then sold at 10 baht. 10 baht is probably equivalent to I would say 30 cents. Yeah, 30 cents US dollars. 10 baht like 50 cents maybe Singapore dollars per se. It's a very entry level price point, if you can think, for lack of better words, very entry level price point to begin with. The major competitor is usually offering at a 22, 25 gram, and then the the price per pack is usually at 20 to 25 range. So they initially begin by a smaller size at the lower entry price point first, and then when the product actually pick up well, because all these other reasons, like it has very unique design, it also has a very unique sensation that differentiate them from the other existing market. The sales is actually pick up very well. Yeah. And then once you actually have this kind of a positive momentum, then they only introduce a bigger size at a price point that is just similar versus the competitions later on. So over there you can easily scale, and then as in a very short period of time, in 2 years, they are actually overtaking the market leaders already. So this is actually something that you can this actually touch upon 2 points when it comes to, first of all, when it's experiment, and if you are a startup companies or if a new brand completely new to the market, you also want to be a bit humble, I would say, in terms of the price point or the kind of entry things that you want to try, because you give them people easier reason for them to try. And then if you're really confident about our product and the consumers will come back, then you can easily offering a second size and then scale the business after that. Does this essentially touch upon 2 things? You can play around your pricing and sizing structures in the context of your competitive offerings, so that you can experiment and then you can scale later as well. Now, so this essentially covers I would say the bigger bucket at areas that we would want to make sure that we address in terms of the new product development process, right? So these are more like the conceptual things that you need to take. And then let's probably spend the last session to more talk about a bit more like researchy type of things. I would not go too much into like a questionnaire or sample size methodology per se, but more in terms of the fundamental things that when you think about quantitative research per se, there are still checkbox that you need to make sure that in place when you actually approach quantitative research in the agility context as well. Um, so to begin with, speed is no longer a barrier when you have to run a quantitative research. Um, Today, because of the online is so developed, right? So there are tons of options. You can get the result in like 300 sample size. You run like a 200 sample size, 300 sample size surveys can be easily turned around in a few days. In some offerings, they can even be like overnight. That's also possible. These are the options over there that's available. But even though when you talk about a bit more like a kind of a robust things, usually from a spectrum of 3 to 4 weeks time, majority of the quantitative research can be done. So speed is no longer a barrier. It's not like in the older days where you probably easily spend 8 weeks or like 3 months to run something. Because you have to do data collections offline, and there are lots of people you need to send on the street and collect the interviews and stuff like that. So speed is no longer actually a barrier today for us to be able to run any quantitative research. However, comes with the speed, then what we really need to think about is that at the end of the day, the reason that we pay the money to do quantitative research is to help us to get a robust, readable base size of the result so that we can actually utilize the result to do some decision making. To be able to do justice about the decision making portion of the result. Reliability and predictability also something that's actually very important when you actually decide what are the methodology that you want to go for in the context of the speed. Reliability is more coming from the basic side of things, like sample size is the starting point, right? So the robustness of the result, the significant differences, or the confidence interval is really different if you run the research based on 50 consumers versus 500 consumers. So that is actually something to start that you have to think about. Now, typically, like just to kind of a good balance in terms of speed or investment and the reliability result, something below 100 is probably a little bit low. If you want to, if you expect the result will have to be give you a bit of predictability. Like usually a typical concept test or product test, you will have to you usually what we actually do from a practical standpoint, you probably need to actually have a little bit of minimum base size, about 150 to 200 ish, or sometimes even higher if you want to do a bit more different data cuts based on that. So sample size is something very important. And the second thing, which is even more important, is actually where do you source your sample. So these days, there are a lot of options available on internet, like say, okay, I could recruit people live, and then do something like A/B testing or something right away. Now, what we really need to think about over there is there has to be a certain stability of who are we interviewing and where is that source of sample coming from. So essentially, if we say that there has to be certain kind of comparability behind the thing. If I'm testing one concept today, um, with like a consumer sourcing from maybe Facebook or whatever source, yeah, live over there. Then the next day I'm testing another one with another fresh different samples. So the who I'm interviewing behind will also have a very significant difference on the result that I'm getting to begin with. So put in other words, that the source of the sample by itself already make it very difficult for me to decide whether my concept A is really better than concept B. So to keep the result comparable versus each other, you really need to kind of think about the methodology behind and then the source of the interviews. You will want to make sure that you have consistencies over there to ensure that the result that you're getting can actually talk into each other. In other words, you can't compare a orange versus a apple. In other words, then of course the other technical things like length of interviews and what kind of methodology they use. It is probably a bit more, I would say, technical things that I'm not going to elaborate further. But essentially, there are a lot of nuances over there, would also determine the reliability of the result. The predictability of the result is another thing. As the most basic level, we need to make sure that we capture the right questions. And then from the conceptual things that we went through in the previous chapter, what we really need to think about actually here in terms of the right question is not just about the fact that whether people will have a purchase interest, right? When you actually think about how people react and how consumers are kind of interact with a particular new launch, you really have to think about all the angles like relevance, usage experiences, what are the alternatives they're trying to substitute with? Is my new product can deliver something that is better than what the currently option is? And what about value? Right? Do I really offer consumer good value based on the price point that I'm offering today? So these are the questions that you all need to cover when you think about um, research, when you really think about running your new product idea through a consumer to get the feedback from there. So it's really not just about, hey, here's here is something that I'm going to offer you at this price. Are you able to buy? Are you interested in buying it or not? Purchase intent is something important, but it's really just one thing that is over there. So this again translated into when you think about this quantitative survey, you need to add the list of questions that you need to collect consumers' response feedback towards needs to be designed to capture all the fundamentals that we need to capture from the beginning. So that's also something that's very important to keep in mind. The other thing that is to keep in mind is that um, we cannot really look at things from a pure face value standpoint. A typical example that I usually see is that you have slides saying that okay, 33% of the Thailand consumers saying that they would want something less. They want to cut back on the sugar content in their food and drink. So is this 33%? What is 33% telling us? Is this really about 33% of the entire Thailand populations? It may not be the truth. And then the reason of that is basically that when people are when you ask a kind of a survey contest, when you ask the people, hey, what do you think about this one? They will always tell you something. And when they actually translate to what they do, there's always a gap in terms of what they actually tell you in the face versus what they actually do in the market. So there's always this face value, validity over things over there at the claim level. When they have to translate into behavior, they might actually not doing what they actually tell you what they do. So whenever you look at any data, if it's collected based on that level, you cannot really. It's very dangerous to only think about things from the face validity of the result by itself. So to put in other words, that you really need to have the result in a kind of benchmark context. What do I mean by benchmark? So for example, if I think about one particular survey by itself, instead of saying, is this 33% of people saying that they want to cut back on the sugar really a good numbers or not, then you might actually need to ask them that what about other things? Like, are they trying to cut back on oil? Are they trying to cut back on fat? Are they trying to increase their protein consumption? There will have to be a context of other things that you actually put there. Then you see a rank. And then if you see a rank and say, okay, maybe in the list of 10 things, or the 33% by itself looks like a big number, but if I look at the list of things against oil, against the saturated fat, against something else, it's actually sitting very bottom of the entire rank. then it means that amongst all these different ingredients, or like this bad ingredient people are trying to avoid, sugar is actually not something that as salient as in consumers' mind yet as other ingredient. So this is actually where the benchmark result will provide a different perspective or interpretation. So it might potentially trigger different decision making versus I simply take the 33% in a single, without the context, without any benchmark per se. So this is one area where you can actually try to look for benchmark to make sense out of the data that you're getting. The second area is obviously, um, you can compare things that you have tested in the past, right? So in the typical, if you're a bit familiar with consumer testing, there's always this kind of things called norms or benchmark per se. So what this means is that, say that over the course of 1 year that I have tested 10 concepts. So this is a sugary drink, this is like RTD juice, and then I've also tested something on the coconut water. So I have collected the feedback towards these 10 different innovations over the course of 1 year based on a similar methodology, right? Assuming the reliability part is being taken care of. So that my result, uh, which would give me a pretty good confidence that my result um, against all these 10 different things are comparable versus each other. So then if I look at this 10 result in the one lens, so this could give me another perspective over which one is the better performing one and which one is the weaker performing one. Then if I want to make a decision that which one I want to pursue out of this 10, then it's easier for me to make a decision as well. So that's another angle of looking at the result in the benchmark or in the context perspective. So these are the things that you can easily do on your own. You don't really I would not necessarily on your own, but if you are a startup, for example, if you don't really have a lot of budget that you want to run, you can actually hire companies like Nielsen or Ipsos to run your research program. You can still like put up a survey, like put a survey and then send it across to a decent number of people and collect their feedback on. If you want to do things like that way, so if you keep these principles in mind, if you always like ask the same questions at the same time, you keep a decent sample size, and you always have a certain set of a consistency in terms of who you are talking to. And then ultimately, cumulatively over the time, the result that you're getting, you are able to make some sense out of it. So there are certain benchmark, there are certain kind of things over there that you can make a decision on. So that's actually one side of things. This other side of things is also that there are like research providers and like professional service providers, like Nielsen is one of them, and of course like Contact or Ipsos. There are also these companies that they all has their own um, solution per se, which we in a research term we call proprietary solution, which will actually also analyze certain things based on a certain validated framework. So this is what we call proprietary solutions. So if you want to work with them, of course you have to be a little bit more. You need to have a bit more budget that you can actually hire a outside agency to run the program for you. Then you also then there's this analytical framework that these certain companies that they will actually deploy that are developed based on certain framework that is actually validated based on some e-market result. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much over there because this is not necessarily a kind of session that I'm going to tell you what Nielsen Basis does. But just to give you an idea in terms of what this might look like, what is a proprietary research framework that is different versus a typical quantitative ad hoc research. Essentially, the questions they ask over there is developed based on cumulative time of R&Ds or validations. So essentially, the way that essentially come to a point that the questions that we try to capture, yeah, are actually developed based on some fundamental conceptual framework that is important to be able to predict outcome of your success. So there is a bit of a validation over there. So essentially, what they do is that they are like I have like tested, for example, like Basis have tested like tons of innovation in the past, that I always have a set of questions I ask in a questionnaire. So when these new products actually launch in the market, I'm able to track the result in the market, and then I'm able to identify the ones that are more successful versus the ones that are less successful. Now, then based on there, then I can actually correlate the in-market success versus the result that I'm collecting before the launch by bringing these two pieces together. Then there's a little bit of a quantitative statistical model that can actually tell me what are the questions that I ask beforehand is more predictable of the actual result when they actually launch in the market. So these are a bit more like a kind of a preparatory solutions that take the analysis, take any novel analysis to the next level. So you don't really have to work with them if you don't have budget, because this essentially you have to pay a bit more monies, right, to do over things over there. But just to give you some ideas, so these are another area of options that is available in the market when it comes to a quant research options standpoint. The one more thing that I want to quickly touch upon is in terms of what kind of things that you can test as well. Now, when we talk about all these different dimensions, right? Relevance or advantage or value propositions per se, they have to translate something. You have to translate what you're trying to offer to consumers into something that actually can test or can you can actually gather consumer feedback on. At the initial stage, it can be something very simple product ideas, essentially just to focus on what this product does for you. You don't have to be very elaborate in terms of like value propositions or pricings, etc. Just to understand what I'm actually offering, something that is actually catering something relevant. The basic relevance is something probably you can check over there when you're only talking about something like core idea. But on the other side, if you really want to understand um, whether this offerings has something like really a competitive advantage, what about what I'm doing in terms of competitive advantage? What about the pricing, like the value proposition per se? Then you might want to elaborate the idea a bit further into something we typically say a concept. Um, in the concept, that what you're trying to do is that you need to explain what the problem that I'm trying to, what the problem this product is trying to resolve, and why I think I can do better than your current solutions. In other words, like RTBs. And you also need to give them an idea in terms of how much they need to pay if they're interested to buy a certain product. So this is actually something that you need to translate into something called a concept board. And then you show them, you show this concept to a few consumers, and you ask them, hey, what do you think about this new idea, blah, blah, blah. So this is another thing that you can test coming from a test stimulus standpoint. Now, the other thing is also about product. We talk about product actually also coming from two angles as well. So there's a very basic level when it comes to product from coming from a, sorry, scratch the basic word. It's actually a one is coming from the formulation standpoint. It's actually I'm actually terribly wrong to say it's basic. It's actually something that's super critical, but it's something that you need to really get the fundamentals right. You need to have the sensory profile right. You need to have the formulation that really deliver a certain efficacy level that you need to deliver. Or in the case of Chobani, for example, they really need to. The intent is just trying to mimic the authentic Greek yogurt texture and flavor through a modern technology. So when you actually test the product, the whether you actually can get something that actually tastes similar versus a homemade recipe. These are the areas you just spend a lot of R&D effort on. So this is in one area of product formulation which you get it right. Now the other part is also in the context of the concept product fit, or in other words that I need to, my product need to deliver a advantage that being promises being being made to consumers as well. So over here, it's not just about the product formulation by itself. It also needs to gather consumers' feedback after they kind of know that what are the promises that I'm expecting from this product, right? So what usually happens over here is that you will need to show them what this new product, what you need to show them the concept first. You need to give them some idea in terms of, hey, this is a fantastic detergent, what it does for you, blah blah blah. And then what happened after that is that you're probably going to leave the product with them, let them use it in a way that in a way that really kind of mimic the reality that they're trying. If they are hypothetically, if they pick up this product on the shelf and they take her home and then they use it in a way that they normally use any detergent. And then after a few days, you visit them again and say, hey, now that you have tried this product, what do you think about it? Do you really think that the product can deliver the expectations that you actually had after you read the initial concept? So this is actually a process that you want to verify is the concept, the product fit, whether these two things are really in sync versus each other. So essentially, these both are important. Um, both are important checkbox to tackle, but depending on different stage, depending on different kind of stage about, especially about your formulations, you will really need to the specific requirement and research design will also be bit different, depending on the objectives and stage that you were trying to achieve as well. Okay, I'm gonna just last bit I'm gonna talk about is the other angle about flexibility or agility. Yeah, at the end of the day, speed to market or research needs or what kind of thing effort you have to spend, it also varies depending on the launch objective and also depending on the effort of the kind of effort you need to put in terms of the product development per se. Again, if we go back to Chobani, this is actually something that the owner has spent at least 2 years in R&D in making. It's definitely not something that the first day that I think about this, I want to mimic something. The next day that he's able to put this product on the shelf. The formulation by itself has taken them 2 years in making. Yeah, so this is actually something that you really need to give it time to get it right over there. But if we think about another example here, if you already have a pretty successful product, right? From a taste perspective, this is actually something people already love. It's just that the format by itself is very big, and it can get messy when you're kind of eating it. So it is something that is more suitable to eat at home, not necessarily something that you can actually take outside or in a kind of on the go or snacking moment. So when they actually launch a mini size, by size, change a little bit of resealable packaging, and then take kind of a gathering into a new consumption moment. So this is a kind of a change you probably don't need a lot of research to actually tackle because the fundamental design of the product is actually something already proven. So again, depending on the type of launch that you're talking about, depending on the effort that you need to make in terms of product development, especially the product development per se, you should actually always have the flexibility to tailor the research needs to which in return is also to meet your speed to market goals as well. So this kind of launch will take longer time in making, so you have to be a little more patient. But there are certain things that just writing on a small tweak, writing on something that's already successful, you can easily expect that it can be turned around faster. And then also you don't really have to spend a lot of research dollars like to collect the data on something that you already know that's actually quite successful. So this is another angle about thinking about agility. Is really about to have the flexibility in your research program to meet the needs of different launch objective and then the profile and then the effort that I need to make in terms of the development process per se. So this is also important, especially if you are a big, if you already have a multiple portfolios, right? At the end of the day, that we are always have a lot of the because of a lot of the competitor landscape is changing very fast these days, there are always these short-term launches that you need to think about in mind, where the speed to market is really more critical for you to tackle. For example, usually what happens over there in terms of this like speed to market is more critical is the easiest thing to think about is like flavor launch. Like sorted egg, for example, is something that just popular. Um, like for very like 2 years ago, sorted egg is just something like kind of trends over there. Like everybody wants to talk about sorted egg over there. Now, if you want to capitalize on that particular thing, you do really want to act fast because these are the typical flavor trend is typically a bit more short, has very short life cycles. If you miss the window, like if you launch it after 2 years, the trend is already gone. Nobody talk about salted egg anymore. So when you think about the kind of something that you expected to have a short shelf life, you don't really want to spend a lot of time to do a lot of a heavy R&D behind the product formulation, blah 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 blah. Because over there, there's a very short window you can act on to capitalize on the opportunities. So you have to really focus on speed to market, mobilize what you can already have, and get something out of there that is really probably like minimum viable is okay. We don't really because it's not something that you expect to last very long. So these are the type of launch you don't really need to spend a lot of time to think about develop, and you don't really need to spend a lot of I would say a heavy research program to also do a little bit validation on. But you think about the left hand side of things. These are usually the breakthrough, the things that you expect to change the landscape of the product category. Either you are a startup that you have a mission to change something like Giovanni does, or you are a category leader that you're thinking about the next bigger bet that can push the category boundary forward as well. So these are usually the breakthrough innovations that are indeed you will take longer time in making. So of course, then the time you take over there is longer, and of course, the type of validations or iterations that you need to do over there will also be more accordingly as well. Then of course, there's something in the middle, which is more like kind of this example that I'm talking about. Um, so depending on the launch goal, depending on the mission that we're trying to achieve, depending on the asset that I'm currently can leverage based on my current brand, either it's equity or existing technology, within all these deciding factors by itself, you could always decide there always will be a certain objective the certain launch is expected to achieve, and accordingly then you have to be really flexible in terms of the kind of a program research that you want to run. So this is another angle about agility. When you think about agility concept in the CPG sector, or you think about adapting the agility or like quantitative research in the agile way, it's not just about only about running something like really fast. It is also about be flexible and align the research needs versus the launch goal and also the asset that I'm currently in play. So this is again probably the last point that I'm going to cover today. Yeah, so I guess that will be all the examples and sharings that I have. So I guess we can probably, I just give the forum back to the audience and see if there's any questions that people are interested.
Daisy, firstly, thank you so much.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that it's a
It's
1 hour.
almost 2 hours. It's almost 2 hours, but I could see that the audience has been, uh, still there. Like the people who were watching it live at the very beginning are still watching it towards the end. So thank you so much. I have to say this is exactly the kind of sessions that I am aiming for Decode Strategy live streams to share. So, you went into a tremendous amount of detail on the subject. You started with the why, you you really nailed it with all your examples in the what and the how. So thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. So I had a couple of questions, but I think you covered my questions towards the end already. But I see that a lot of marketers who were watching the live stream, there are some very relevant questions which have come from the audience. So I'll pop the first question on the screen and read it out for you, and then let's move on from there. So the first question is from Vanji. We both know Vanji, so so it's good to see her in the audience as well. So Vanji wants to know that based on your experience, based on your observation in the last 3 to 5 years, does the pursuit of agile NPD launch bring risk of driving breakthrough product, given there's also some truth behind that, good things, they take time to happen. So what are
Yeah,
your views on this?
I completely agree with this observation, and this is essentially what we have seen actually happen in the past. But
Yeah.
what I would actually trying to probably address in a slightly different way is that it is not necessarily that the pursuit of agility NPD by itself. It's more in terms of the kind of a misconception when it
Yeah.
comes to the concept of agility, because what it typically happen right now,
Hmm.
the typical way that we see when manufacturers acting on agility is purely on the speed to market angle,
Right.
which is actually not necessarily the case. Even
Yeah.
if you anyone that actually we are very familiar with this book on agile innovation, right?
Yeah.
This book over there. If you take the chance to read the book really closely,
Yeah.
it is really agility is not just about speed. It's about really about a system,
Hmm.
and it's about flexibility. You need to actually iterate over time, and you need to have the flexibility about iterate your idea anytime. So that's number one takeaway. It is my takeaway. The second is also that book by itself has a very clear articulation about the fact that you need to really have a portfolio of innovation pipelines.
Right.
The you need to manage a big portfolio by itself, which will give you the flexibility of essentially deciding which are the ones you want to pursue first and which one to decide you want to decide later. Or putting in other words,
Yeah.
it is about having I just think, for lack of a better analogy, I would say just put, you don't put one, you have to put your egg in different basket
Yeah. Yeah.
at the end of the day. Well, so portfolio management is important because as a lot of marketeers does have this revenue goal to achieve, right? You need to actually think about your day-to-day target in
Yeah.
mind. But in
Right.
the meantime, you also need to think about, if I'm a market leaders or whatever, you also need to think about what other things that I can keep in the pipeline that actually transform the category moving forward. So
Right.
the agility concept over there is also to keep a portfolio in place so
Hmm.
that I can have the flexibilities or the long-term vision without compromising the short-term market share goal that I need to achieve as
Got
well.
it.
But what typically happens, however, is that
Hmm.
because of the e-commerce craze, because
Yeah.
of this digital age that we're living in, everybody
Yeah.
comes. I'm sure that like either you work in R&D or you work in brand manager space, people are just
Right.
knocking at your door every day. Hey, here's the popular things that you should consider for your next launch.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Then there's always this pressure to
Yeah.
be acting on such things without a
Right.
kind of oversight. I would say there's a bit more misconception happening over there,
Right.
to kind of lead to
Yeah.
a less patience or less focus
Right.
on the, that's one thing. And the other thing I have to say is also on the area of the fact that nobody really knows how to
Hmm.
do a breakthrough innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
innovation is one of the, I would say, it's very important aspect in the marketing space, but it's also probably under researched space. You don't really have
Right.
any textbook that can tell you how can you identify your next breakthrough innovation. Nobody
Right.
knows what to do. That's
Yeah.
also a reality
Yeah.
that since people don't know what to do, and they will also have a bit more easier to have failures rather than success, then also kind of another barrier for companies to spend more time into this space as well. So there's different reasons in play, but I would say it's more about the misconception to begin with that really kind of lead to the result that we're seeing today.
Awesome. So we'll come back to the other questions of Vanji after this question from Vishal. So his question is: the global pandemic has made the world's local behaviors more similar to each other. Do you agree or disagree? And how does it open the space for innovations and NPD learnings to be transferred across the world? Um, I have my own views on this, but I think the session is for you to share. If you have any views on this question.
Um, I honestly wouldn't really say that the global pandemic has I mean, maybe in the short-term period,
Yeah.
yes, because like every country will live in the lockdown areas, like for 3 months or 4 months, right?
Right.
So within those kind of a very short-term period, yes, of course, everybody's probably in the same similar mind. But
Yeah.
depending on the different stage, some countries will get out this faster. Some countries, even though they are still scrambling with the pandemic, people are kind of live through it as well. There's
Yeah.
actually my personal view is there's different adaptation along the way to begin with. I actually this is a funny topic actually. I started when the pandemic first started in China. I was in China. I literally spent 7 days not
Mm.
going anywhere, not even step out of my door. So
Right.
like over there, and then I get out of there before it gets very serious, right? And then
Yeah.
I travel out of there, and then when I moved to Bangkok, then I get into second stage over there where people in the panic mode and they were not trying to do anything as well. So I would say the manifestation of certain stage, it does actually vary a little bit.
Yeah.
But in the short-term impact, yes, it will actually trigger some similar things happening. You will see something similar like in-home consumption will be flying, or e-commerce or delivery to the doors. But
Right.
depending on different stage, where different economy or countries adapting to the pandemic influences, there will still be there will be still a big local contest
Right.
coming over there as well. The other example that I can think about is funnily that in US, what we see is that in the pandemic stage, ice cream consumption and like those junk food like
Yeah.
chocolate, a lot of these things are actually booming because people
Right.
are actually buying more. But
Yeah.
in countries like Thailand,
Yeah.
because people don't have a huge habit of consuming this product at home. Typically, these are actually out of home consumptions, and this
Right.
category is actually declining significantly. So
Yeah.
again, they
Yeah.
are pre-deciding contests that's coming into the picture as well. Yeah, I would say it's a kind of complex things
Mm.
over there, but
Mm.
based on some observations that I would say, yeah, there are still nuances that is
Right.
actually common locally as well.
Awesome. So we'll move on to the next question. New product development in CPG normally takes around 12 to 18 months if it is fully validated product mix to be launched.
Yeah.
What are the elements CPG businesses try most to be agile and iterated?
Yeah, that's actually something very typical. That actually when I begin with, like say the old school, right?
Yeah.
The reason that a lot of those things are being abandoned is because of that time frame that we're talking about.
Right.
The another area of being agility is something that I didn't really touch upon today, but
Yeah.
it's actually a great question that actually bring this up as well.
Mm.
So agility at the end of the day is also about the accumulated learnings. So testing in the historical sense is heavily
Yeah.
on validation.
Right.
It's heavily on launch, go no go decisions. So the other adaptation that to think about agility in agility and the research in today's world is really about testing for the learning purposes. You
Right.
can always test. You can always keep testing your concept over the
Mm.
period of time, and then you can always running the product formulation design workshop, and you can always have this product formulation testing along the side as well.
Yeah.
So whenever you have something like over there, like maybe a certain things doesn't really work out before,
Yeah.
now you have the throughout the product formulation development, hey, you suddenly come up with something that actually can fit a particular concept you already validated. Then there's agility part comes into the picture. Then you can simply marry the learning together and then move fast over there.
Right.
What is happening in the past is that the research money is heavily spent, effort is heavily spent on the last angle.
Hmm.
I'm only testing this one or two particular things that I have in my mind at the end, and then I heavily understand that it's validation per se, but
Yeah.
the more effort needs to be actually spent on the ideation stage and then the initial prototype, stuff like
Right.
that.
Right.
And you need to have database banking kind of learning per se that you can easily
Hmm.
adapt and iterate.
Hmm.
That's actually to approach agility and iteration from a systematic learning per se. That is also another angle of overcoming the time frame as well. Of course, this is only again coming
Yeah.
from research standpoint, not about uh, whether it's realistic to kind of tweak your KPAS or production cycle to adjust that. That's also that's another whole different discussion. Not
Yeah.
my area. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure that somebody else will have a better perspective on that.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll move on to the last question for today. So there might be some NPD cases that failed quantitative research but turned out to be success in the market. What are the possible areas quantitative research might overlook in these kind of cases?
Yeah, this is exactly also the baggage that we need to also as a market research practitioner by itself that we need to be consciously aware of as well,
Right.
because this goes back to the reliability and the predictability, two things that I was talking about. So
Yeah.
they are, because at the end of the day we are collecting feedback from consumers, right? There are a lot of things can go wrong in that particular process by itself.
Right.
Where do you source your samples? What is reliable methodologies? How do you show this and that? And then what are questions you ask? The questions you ask, does it actually have the dimension to capture what what you need to capture by itself? The
Yeah.
methodology per se needs to be robust by itself. And then I have to say that there are things that we have made a long way along. There's a lot of improvement. There's still a lot of improvement that we will need to make along the way. This is more like kind of a, I would say, the responsibility of professional practitioners like us to make sure that we offer something that's really stay the truth of robustness over there. But it's, I would say, at the end of the day, it's really about the reliability and the predictability, two things
Right.
over there.
Right.
I wouldn't really say it's I would say it's something that we as a practitioner need to constantly be aware and improve and make sure that we are of actually getting something that's actually be helpful to the brand managers and then the manufacturers in place.
Awesome. Okay, so that's all for the Q&A session. And Daisy, thank you so much. This was an absolutely, very, very lovely session. I just noticed the clock as well. So instead of 1 hour, we spent two
Yeah,
hours in the
I
session.
didn't realize it was 2 hours. I'm sorry.
And
I think I just talked too much in the middle as well.
But that is actually something which I encouraged you to do, and I encourage all the speakers in this session, to do as well, because the intention over here is to really be able to transfer knowledge in a very, very simple way, so that people who are watching the session later, they can learn and they can try and take back some learnings and start applying it in whatever they do. So. I have been a part of a lot of innovation processes, and I have had a lot of heated conversations
Oh
also on
yeah,
this subject. But
absolutely.
I think you really put a lot of things in a lot of context that there is a need for agility, but there is a way in which you can prioritize the right things and be agile about it. And at the same time, there are certain situations where some decisions need a little more validation and need a little more time to be invested, whereas certain decisions are those decisions where there is a calculated risk in going a little fast with it and moving ahead with those kind of decisions. So fabulous session. Thank you so much for your time. This has been lovely. And uh, Yeah, that's all. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks to all our viewers, and thanks to Vanji and Vishal for some really nice questions. And I'll see you all, to all my viewers, I'll see you all next week again. And next week, we've got Dhiren, who is the CMO of Kraft Heinz Asia. So he'll be talking about building a full marketing mix mindset. So thanks a ton, and see you all.
Thank you. Have a lovely
Thank
weekend,
you.
everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.